Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be looking at Roman aqueducts, specifically the engineers who built these incredible structures. We'll be using an episode called The Hidden Engineers of Ancient Rome from Ancient Civilization Podcasts, hosted by Dr. Sarah Chen.
I think it's fascinating how we often picture those arches when we think about aqueducts.
Yeah.
But the real genius is the precision behind them. The engineering was incredible.
It really is. The podcast mentions that they built these aqueducts with a gradient of 1 foot descent for every 300 feet of distance. How did they measure that accurately with the tools they had?
That's a great question. They used pretty simple tools, actually. Things like weighted strings and bronze surveying devices called grommet.
Grommet.
Yeah. A grommet is basically plumb lines and a cross. Used to make right angles and lines of sight. They had a deep understanding of geometry.
It's hard to imagine the Aqua Marcia aqueduct only dropped 10 meters over its entire length, which was over 90 kilometers. It's crazy. That's a precision of 0.01%. Today, we'd use lasers and computers for that.
I know. And that level of precision wasn't just for looks. It was vital for the aqueducts to work. That consistent, gentle slope allowed gravity to keep the water flowing.
Sounds like these Roman engineers knew what they were doing. But why were aqueducts so important? What was happening in Rome that made them necessary?
Well, around 312 DCE, Rome was growing fast. The problem was their water sources couldn't keep up with all the people.
I see.
The Tiber River, their main source, was becoming more and more polluted. Not ideal for drinking water.
Ah, so they had a water crisis. You need clean water to have a successful civilization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where Appius Claudius Caecus comes in. He was a Roman censor.
A censor, like someone who bans books?
Not quite. In ancient Rome, censors were powerful officials. They were responsible for public morals, and more importantly for this, overseeing public works projects.
So Caecus basically said, we need aqueducts.
Pretty much. But Dr. Chen makes it clear that while we associate his name with the project, he relied heavily on a team of engineers, surveyors, and architects.
Whose names we don't know.
Yeah. It reminds us that history often only remembers the leaders, but it's the people behind the scenes that make things happen.
That's so true. So they built this amazing engineering project because they had to. But what I want to know is, how did running water change Roman society? Did it do more than just give them enough water?
Oh, it definitely did. The impact of aqueducts goes way beyond practicality. For the first time in history, a major city had a constant supply of running water, and it was available to all citizens. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor.
Wow, so everyone had access. That's pretty amazing for that time period.
I know, right? Think about that. Equal access to a vital resource. It fostered a sense of community and social cohesion, which was remarkable for that era. Dr. Chen even quotes a writer from that period. He observed people from all walks of life gathering at the fountains, sharing news, and doing business.
So the aqueducts were more than just pipes. They were shaping the social fabric of Roman life. It's incredible how much we've learned already. I want to hear more about how all this water changed their daily lives. But first, let's take a moment to think about what we've uncovered so far. Running water is something we just expect today, but in ancient Rome, it was a huge deal. We were talking about how the aqueducts made water available for everyone. What other changes did this abundance of water bring about?
Well, it completely changed their way of life. They were finally able to build public baths because of the steady water supply. And the baths became a big part of Roman culture.
Oh yeah, the Roman baths. I've seen pictures of those ruins. They look pretty impressive. It must have been more than just places to wash up.
Definitely. The baths were way more than just hygiene facilities. Think of them more as big social spaces, like community centers, where people could bathe, exercise, socialize, and even do business all in one place.
It's amazing to think about. Big halls with marble floors, steaming pools, people from all walks of life hanging out.
Exactly. And because everyone could enjoy the baths, they became a sort of social leveler. Senators and everyday citizens could all use the same facilities.
It's fascinating to think about the social dynamics. Dr. Chen mentions in her podcast that a writer from that time described the baths as places where people of all classes would gather. They'd share news and do business. The water flows for all, he said.
It really highlights how the aqueducts did more than just bring water to Rome. They created spaces for people to connect in ways they couldn't before.
It really makes you think about how something as basic as access to water can have such a huge impact on society. Were there any other impacts from the aqueducts besides the bath?
For sure. The aqueducts also had a big impact on sanitation and hygiene.
Makes sense. Having so much water would let them build better sanitation systems.
Exactly. The Romans could finally have things like public latrines, sewage systems, and even street cleaning because of the aqueducts. They really valued cleanliness and public health, and the aqueducts were key in achieving those goals.
It sounds like the aqueducts helped make Rome a much healthier and more enjoyable place to live. I can't believe how one innovation could have such widespread effects.
And it's not just about the quantity of water. The Romans cared about the quality too. They knew that clean, drinkable water was vital for public health.
Wait, they had water quality control back then? How did that work?
Well, they had officials that regularly inspected the aqueducts, checking for leaks and contamination. They even had techniques for filtering and settling the water to make it clearer and tastier.
Wow, that's incredible. Dr. Chen mentions settling tanks and filtering systems that use charcoal and sand. It's like they were ahead of their time in so many ways when it came to water.
Yeah, their approach was really advanced for their time. They didn't just see water as something to use up. They saw it as crucial for health, well-being, and even the structure of their society. They were thinking about the long term.
Listening to all of this makes me wonder what lessons we can take from the Romans and their aqueducts, especially now with climate change, growing populations, and our aging infrastructure. It seems like they were dealing with similar challenges.
That's a really important question. We might not be building huge aqueducts anymore, but there's a lot we can learn from the principles behind their success.
What kinds of principles are you talking about?
Well, their emphasis on long-term planning, public access to clean water, and their respect for water as a limited resource. They understood that building water infrastructure wasn't just about convenience, it was an investment in the future of their society.
That's a good point. We often see infrastructure as just pipes and concrete, but it really is about creating a better future.
Exactly. The Roman aqueducts remind us that those investments have a huge impact on the health, well-being, and even the social structure of a civilization, just like they did for Rome all those centuries ago.
It's inspiring to think about the legacy of those engineers. Before we wrap up, I want to go back to something we touched on earlier, those unsung heroes, the ones whose names we'll never know. Their work was essential, but history hasn't given them much credit. How can we appreciate their contributions today when we don't even know who they were?
That's a good question. Even though we've lost their names, we can see their ingenuity and skill in the structures they built. Every time we see a Roman aqueduct standing strong after all these years, we're seeing the results of their work.
So in a way, their legacy is part of the aqueducts themselves. We don't need to know their names to appreciate their impact.
Right. And it reminds us that progress often depends on a lot of people working behind the scenes. People whose dedication and talent may not be celebrated, but are essential to shaping our world. Their stories deserve to be remembered.
It makes you think about the unsung heroes of today, the people working to solve modern problems. Maybe future generations will look back on their work with the same awe and appreciation that we have for the Roman aqueducts.
That's an insightful thought. And with that, we come to the end of our deep dive into the world of Roman aqueducts. It's been an amazing exploration. We've seen incredible engineering and learned about the impact these structures had on Roman society. We can even draw some important lessons for today.
I don't know about you, but I feel pretty inspired. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep appreciating those who make the world a better place.